However, there are some problems with this. So this is a excerpt from a January 2024 speech by Kim Jong-un. So keep in mind, this is before the coup attempt, before martial law, right? Because that happens in December of 2024, right? But this is my key point here is this is what all Korean presidents, South Korean presidents, are up against. But this is also what Lee Jae-myung is having to deal with as he searches for dialogue. And this is an official speech by Kim Jong-un, remember, the leader of North Korea. It is a final conclusion drawn from the bitter history of the inter-Korean relations that we cannot go along the road of national restoration and reunification together with the ROK clan that adopted as its state policy the all-out confrontation with our republic, dreaming of the collapse of our government and unification by absorption, and lost compatriotic consciousness, getting more vicious and arrogant in the madcap confrontational racket. So basically saying, this whole thing about unification, we're not so sure about that. And it's because of South Korea, which, again, is problematic. I mean, North Korea is doing these kinds of things. But in any case, the North-South relationship has been completely fixed into the relations between two states hostile to each other and relations between two belligerent states, not the consanguineous or homogenous ones anymore. So what it's saying is we're not really the same people anymore. This is the present situation of relations between the North and the South today, caused by the heinous and self-destructive confrontational maneuvers of the ROK, a group of outsiders, top-class stooges, and the true picture of the Korean Peninsula just unveiled before the world. We have formulated a new stand on the North-South relations and the policy of reunification and dismantled all the organizations we established as solidarity bodies for peaceful reunification at the current session of the Supreme People's Assembly, which discusses the laws of the DPRK. We should also completely remove the eyesore monument to the three charters for national reunification, standing at the southern gateway to the capital city of Pyongyang, so we should tear down the statue, which they did, and take other measures so as to completely eliminate such concepts as reunification, reconciliation, and fellow countrymen from the national history of our republic. So two things about this, first of all, and I don't want to really go into the fact that there's some problems with the English. That's not important for our sake. First of all, you can see why conservative Koreans don't think you can dialogue with North Korea, right? This is not a speech given by someone who's interested in really rational dialogue, where it's like constant insults, putting all the blame on you. It's really hard to have a dialogue that way, right? There's no opening for dialogue, and that's on purpose, right? That's on purpose. Because that's the other key point, is what this is saying is, you know what? We're done with reunification. We are not, you South Koreans, you are not our fellow countrymen. That's not how we see it anymore. In the past, in the North and South Korea, both of them emphasize we are one people, we're one group. Unification is something we should strive for, especially peaceful unification. That's what we need to be going for. And both could agree on that. And it was still, I think, unrealistic to happen, but at least they were talking. But now this is saying, we're not really one people anymore, and there's no way we can talk about unification. And we're not even going to talk about you as our fellow Koreans. You're a hostile state, and your people aren't our people. So that's a big change, right? That's a big change. And President Lee Jae-myung has tried to open the door for dialogue, and he has managed to help turn down the heat a bit, but it's not going to go as far as I think he would like, right? And it's hard for me to see things going any differently. I was never a big believer in the idea that unification could happen through talk, or that North Korea would simply collapse. I didn't think that was going to happen either. I'm a pessimist, I suppose. I understand why people would want to be optimistic about this, but I think this is a serious problem. And now it's even worse because North Korea is saying, we don't even want to try. And even though President Lee Jae-myung is constantly trying to get them to have a dialogue, they're just not interested. And I don't think they are going to ever really have a serious dialogue. One reason for this, and this is an important trend that is different from what I said in 2023. So previously, when I talked about North Korea, people would often say to me, why don't they care about their people? Why doesn't the North Korean government do things to actually help their people? Why don't they allow economic development? And I would answer, because North Korea is concerned with regime survival. If they open their doors to allow economic development, that threatens the regime. So they're not thinking like a liberal democracy where the people get the right to vote and we can throw out bad leaders. They're not thinking that way. They're thinking, how do I stay in power? I don't stay in power by voting. I stay in power by controlling things like the military and ideological education and things like that. So that's what I discussed in 2023. I focused on ideas of regime survival. I don't think North Korea thinks about regime survival anymore. Survival is just, how do I survive till tomorrow, right? Like, that's just like, we're in a bad situation. How do we just keep going? I don't think they care about that anymore, not because they're going to collapse, quite the opposite, because their position is so much better now. Just over the last couple of years, their position is so much better now. So I don't think they're concerned with regime survival. I think they're thinking, how do we expand our power and influence? All right, so I just want to stress that, right? They're not thinking, how do we just get by? They're thinking, we're doing all right. How do we do even better? How do we get even stronger, right? So that's something to think about. And I'll talk about momentarily why that is. Well, I think the big reason is, but I want to mention one other thing that I think is important as we talk about North Korea before I do that. So you may remember I showed you this image, and in many ways it's a very cute image, right? Like, I mean, never mind, I'm not a big fan of Kim Jong-un, as president or leader of North Korea, does some pretty terrible things. But if you just think about this as a picture of a daddy and his daughter, this is cute, right? And you look at that's a cute little girl, right? And she's dressed up in kind of like an adult, but it's clear that it's like how a little kid dresses up like an adult to be cute, right? So we have that picture. Here's a picture from February 2024 of her and her dad. It's not the nicest picture. I don't think Kim Jong-un would be happy with that picture. He's not he's not looking at the camera, right? He's just looking off the side. We all have those kinds of pictures where it's one of us isn't paying attention or something. Never mind that. Focus on her, right? His daughter, whose name we don't know, right? She doesn't officially have a name yet. She hasn't been listed by her name. I think she's usually called Kim Joo-hae, which we use because that's what Dennis Rodman thought he heard. And nothing against Dennis Rodman. He doesn't speak Korean, so he might have slightly misheard it, right? But in any case, that's what she's usually called, Kim Joo-hae. She's, I think, 12 or 13 in this picture. And I say 12 or 13 because we're not sure. She looks like she's starting to act like a presidential figure, as someone who could be one day a leader, right? So this is one very big trend, and I think it's something that gives the Kim Jong-un confidence. Is now he has an heir. Now he has someone who can start getting ready. Now this creates a whole bunch of issues if he was to hand power over to her. One thing you notice, it's not just in Korean culture, a lot of East Asian culture, you can get women be powerful leaders, but they usually have to stay unmarried to do that. So, for example, there was a female president of Taiwan. She did not marry. Remember, Park Geun-hye was president of South Korea, and she did not marry. And basically, if you're in a patriarchal culture, if you're a woman who becomes a leader, you can't marry because then you got to do what your husband says. Like I'm oversimplifying things, but that's kind of the problem. There would be a fear that if you have a female leader and she's married, then how do you know that she's doing what she wants to do? Because she kind of has to listen to her husband. That's a problem because if you have basically succession from father to child, father to son initially, but now father to daughter, well, how's she going to have kids? Right, like that's kind of the tricky thing. How does she get an heir if she's never allowed to marry? So that's a problem. I don't know how they're going to deal with it. But the key thing is, I think in the long run, this is still a sense that the regime is stronger because there's a feeling, there's someone here who I can get ready to lead, and he's going to have lots of time to train and be ready. So that's one thing that I think has strengthened North Korea's hand. And as North Korea feels stronger, it doesn't need to worry about regime survival, and it could care less about South Korea. When North Korea is worried about regime survival, it did need to make sure that money was coming in somehow, and it could get donations from South Korea, and would often use dialogue as a way to get donations. They don't need a dialogue. They don't need that risk that comes with dialogue if they are feeling more powerful. And you may say, well, they got an heir, so what? How does that make them feel that much more powerful? Well, that's not the only thing. The other thing was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And one of the early supporters of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that stuck up for them at the United Nations was North Korea. And what has happened is, as North Korea has supported Russia, Russia and China got closer together, right? Where China also, President Xi Jinping declared that that they had a friendship with Russia that had no limits. And so we have this kind of confluence of interest between China, Russia, and North Korea that has only strengthened since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And North Korea has been supplying Russia with a large amount of ammunition. North Korea has a very artillery-heavy army. Artillery is very important. If there were to be a war in Korea, it's an area where artillery is really necessary. And they have both huge stockpiles of artillery shells that work, I think it's 155, that work just fine in Russian artillery pieces. And they have the capacity to build more. And what has happened is they've gotten closer together. A lot of what allowed kind of limited North Korea was sanctions against it because of its nuclear ambitions, its nuclear testing and so forth. But in order for those sanctions to work, Russia and China have to enforce the sanctions. But now they don't really have an interest in enforcing the sanctions, right? Like, they're pretty cool with stuff being smuggled in to North Korea. They're fine with that. Especially Russia is very fine with it because it wants North Korean artillery shells. And I remember sometimes there would be people like, oh, North Korean artillery shells aren't that great. They blow up when they're not supposed to, sometimes destroying an artillery piece and so on and so forth. And that's not ideal. But there's millions of them, and they work well enough. Right. So what's happened is Russia, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it needs things like artillery shells. China is close with Russia. It doesn't want Russia to lose. It's kind of willing to work with it. And that all benefits North Korea. Right. North Korea can sell stuff to Russia and make a lot of money that way. And it's not just that, right? So one thing that happened was the Ukrainians actually seized a fairly significant piece of Russian territory, right? So Ukrainian soldiers actually went into Russia and grabbed some territory in a place called Kursk. And what happened then was North Korea actually sent soldiers, because they have like a defensive pact with Russia. So there were actually North Korean soldiers in Russia fighting Ukrainians. And a lot of them got killed, but a lot of them also came back. And now they have some experience with modern warfare, which is something that they lacked before. But now they have literally sealed this kind of defensive alliance, excuse me, in blood. Right? This is now sealed in blood with the Russians. And North Korean troops have fought and died there. Now, it's not quite clear everything that North Korea is getting. We know they're getting money. And they're probably also getting help with their military technology. North Korea's military technology is not the best. There's a lot of problems with it. Their army's not actually that well equipped. They're not technologically advanced, but now they're getting help from Russia. It would seem in things like rocketry and submarines. Submarines are very, very important because you can stick nuclear missiles in submarines, and you can, and they're very hard to find. And they can just pop up and fire off a couple nuclear missiles. So this is scary stuff, right? So North Korea's like, we don't need a dialogue with South Korea. We've got Russia giving us all this money, all this technology. We're good. So it's kind of a weird thing, right? I mean, this is just things that we did not see happening, even though when I last made this video, remember, it was in 2023. So after the invasion, but before Russia was really ramping up its relationship with North Korea. Okay, so what's going on with South Korea? Well, at the same time, and I should point out, these are images from screen captures from a YouTube channel called Perun, which is it's an Australian YouTuber who looks at military logistics. And it's amazing because this guy, he doesn't even animate his PowerPoints. He just has PowerPoints and you never see his face. And he talks, and he gets hundreds of thousands of hits for his videos because he's funny, but he also knows what he's talking about. But what's happening also is that as North Korea is ramping up its military, so also is South Korea. South Korea is looking to make or I should say but to further develop its international arms manufacturing, so that South Korea is not just producing weapons for itself, it's also producing weapons for the rest of the world. And South Koreans are really good at building stuff. They're really good at technology. And so they're becoming a major hub. It's not quite clear what's going to happen, but U.S., we basically have almost no shipbuilding capacity anymore. And it looks like if we can, we may start subcontracting out to South Korea. And what's really, I think, fascinating is when Poland wanted to develop its military further, they bought a whole bunch of Korean stuff, right? So Poland, of course, gets really nervous when Russia invades Ukraine. They share they technically have a border with Russia. They buy a whole bunch of stuff from Korea, right? And so here is again, more images from Perun, but there's Hyundai Motor Group. They are advertising. They go to trade shows that are focused on the military. So again, this is not something I would have predicted so much a few years ago. Studying Korea is really fascinating. And it's not North Korean soldiers fighting in Russia and South Korea becoming a major defense exporter are not things that I would have predicted when I went into Korean studies. I'll tell you that. Now, I don't want to end on necessarily as depressing of notes of that. I do want to note that some trends are continuing, especially South Korea and pop culture. So one thing, and just to give you a sense of just how important Korean identity is for Korean people, Koreans lamented that they did not have a Nobel Peace Prize for literature, right? Like this was a thing that was really frustrating for them. And finally they won one, right? So I do want to note that Han Kong, one of the rare Koreans that has a one-syllable name instead of a two-syllable name. So Han is the family name, Kong is her personal name. But she won, was a novelist who won a Nobel Peace Prize for literature. So that dream was finally achieved by Koreans, and they're very happy because now, because Japan, I think Japanese people had won one before, and you know that just is not allowed, right? We can't let the Japanese win something and then us not be able to win something. And maybe you don't read novels that much, but I remember for a while this song seemed like it was everywhere, and it was a collaboration between Rose and Bruno Mars. And one thing though that you probably have heard this song, my kids got sick of it, but one thing that's funny, you may not know this is actually based on a Korean drinking song, right? So this is a song that you would sing with your friends and drink with, I think if you lose or not. And I'll just end, again, I mentioned this in class, but I'll just mention it again because I think it's a nice way to end it. Of course, you had K-pop Demon Hunters, which just apparently makes gobs and gobs of money, more people loving Korean popular culture. And like I said, President Lee Jae-myung even mentioned it when he came to talk to the Americans, and I thought that was really striking. But of course, I think it's made by Sony, isn't it? I'm not sure. So that's interesting, Japanese company. So basically what we have here is Korea is still important, global player in a lot of ways, and maybe not such good ways. You know, like I say, North Koreans in Russia killing Ukrainians, not so sure I'm into that. But I am happy to see things like K-pop Demon Hunters come out and making the world a better place, one demon slayed at a time.